Welcome, focused learners, to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating story, a classic tale really, of how some incredibly well-intentioned agricultural policies in India accidentally gave birth to a massive, totally unregulated underground market. It's the ultimate paradox of protection. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture a serene, golden wheat field gently blowing in the wind. Looks incredibly peaceful, right? Well, beneath that tranquil surface lies a deeply complex, decades-long legal battle. We are going to explore the hidden, shadowy world of agricultural land leasing in India and see exactly how laws meant to help farmers actually force the whole thing underground. Part 1. Era of Good Intentions, Post-Independence Goals. So let's rewind a bit to the time right after India gained independence. There was a massive shift in national priorities. The absolute top priority for the leadership back then: two main things: abolish the feudal zamindari system and get the land to the tiller. They looked at the old inherited land arrangements, especially tenancy and subtenancy, and basically saw them as hangovers from a feudal past. The goal was to dismantle that old system completely and redistribute the land directly into the hands of the people who are actually out there, sweating and working it. Makes total sense, right? But here comes part 2. The unintended fallout, when laws backfire. This is where the paradox really kicks in. Look directly at the slide to see the stark contrast we're dealing with. In theory, these state tenancy reform laws had incredibly noble goals. They wanted to protect tenants, transfer ownership rights to them, and redistribute the land. To pull this off, states clamped down hard, placing severe restrictions on land leasing, in many cases just straight up prohibiting it. But the result on the ground, it was a disaster. There was barely any land transfer at all. Instead of helping, the policies backfired completely. They actually stripped away whatever legal protections tenants used to have and forced the entire practice of tenancy completely into the shadows. Part 3. Driven underground, the economics of tenancy. Let's look at the specific market forces that pushed these everyday farming agreements completely off the books. Consider this fraction for a second: 1/4 to 1/5. While some states didn't outright ban tenancy, they tried to control it by slamming a strict ceiling on land rent. They capped it at just 1/4 or 1/5 of the total agricultural produce. Now, on paper, that sounds amazing, right? A great way to stop tenant farmers from being exploited. But wait until you see what happens when strict government policy collides with raw market economics. As the Niti Aayog report lays out plain and simple, with this rent falling well below the market rate, contracts became oral, with the tenant paying a much larger share of the produce in rent. Talk about irony. Because the government capped the rent so far below what the market actually demanded, landowners just stopped signing official leases. They flat out refused. This left tenants with absolutely zero legal recognition. That means no access to formal bank credit, no crop insurance, no disaster relief, nothing. And the kicker? Without a legal contract, they ended up paying a much higher share of their crops anyway. It's crazy because different states tried different approaches, but they all slammed into the exact same problem: outright bans on leasing? Well, obviously, that drove the practice straight underground. But other states tried something else. They gave tenants a right to purchase the leased land from the owner after a certain amount of time. Well, you can probably guess what happened. Landowners completely panicked at the thought of losing their property, so they refused to sign formal leases. They forced everything to be an oral agreement. Either way, the tenant was left completely vulnerable and invisible to the law. Now, the states that banned leasing outright did carve out a few tiny loopholes. If the landowner was a widow, a minor, disabled, or in the defense personnel, they were legally allowed to lease out their land. But look closely at that list. You know who's missing? Literally everyone else. These exceptions were so narrow that the vast majority of everyday, hardworking farmers were left completely out in the cold. If they needed to lease land just to expand a little or make ends meet, the law offered them absolutely no protection. Which brings us to Part 4. Drafting a model solution, the Niti Aayog Committee. Finally, a chance to fix decades of unintended consequences. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the government finally decided to tackle this mess. Enter Niti Aayog, the government of India's policy think tank. In October 2016, they dropped a massive, course-correcting document, the report of the Expert Committee and Model Law on Agricultural Land Leasing. They were handed the incredibly tough job of examining this whole convoluted situation and coming up with a brand new, actually functional legal framework. And they didn't just sit in a room making guesses either. The committee, chaired by Dr. Tajmal Huq with Dr. J.P. Mishra as the member secretary, actually went out into the real world. They held extensive consultations all over the place. We're talking direct conversations with stakeholders, actual farmers, and civil society groups. They needed to make sure that the messy, boots-on-the-ground reality was finally being heard and factored into this new model law. So here is their 3-step master plan. Step 1. Legalize land leasing. Just bring it completely out of the shadows once and for all. Step 2. Provide a flexible model framework that individual states can actually adapt to their own unique situations. Because, let's face it, agriculture in India is incredibly diverse. And step 3. By finally legalizing and formalizing the whole process, promote the efficiency, the equity, and the poverty alleviation that those very first post-independence laws completely failed to deliver. So we have to ask ourselves, does legalizing the underground market hold the ultimate key to empowering the modern farmer? It's a huge question to ponder. By finally shining a light on these informal contracts and bringing them into a safe, regulated, legally recognized space, we just might be giving everyday farmers the structural backbone they need to actually thrive. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you next time as we unravel another incredible topic.